Hey, it's Netta, and I'm so excited to tell you that I've made a brand new quiz just for you called the Cravings Quiz. It's a quick 10-question quiz that I designed to get you thinking more deeply about your cravings, because the first step to feeling more in control around food, especially sugar, is to be aware of how cravings affect you. And whereas most quizzes give you generic feedback, I'm offering to give you specific, personalized feedback and practical tips to help you turn theory into action. So go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the big green button to do the quiz today and to take the first step so that you can get rid of cravings. Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and today I'm talking to a very special guest, author Dr. Stephen Gundry, who's an expert in gut health. And we have a lot to say about gut health, including one particular thing that's really bad for gut health. You want to guess what it is? I'll tell you. It's sugar. And in fact, we had so much to discuss about gut health that this episode is just the first half of our conversation. I'll publish the second half in next week's episode. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources, then I have plenty for you. First, download my 5 tips to get rid of cravings. And those 5 tips may not be what you think they are. So go to aftersugarclub.com and download your 5 tips today. Come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at MyLifeAfterSugar, which is where you'll get all kinds of inspiration, so that you can see that it's perfectly possible to live a happy and active life, even if you don't eat sugar. You can also check out my TikTok account at Netta_lifeaftersugar. All right, so here's the first half of my chat with Dr. Stephen Gundry. So today I'm with Dr. Stephen Gundry, author and doctor in the west of the United States. Stephen, can I just start by asking you how you grew up in the States and what you used to eat when you were a child?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest in Omaha, Nebraska, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it was kind of a typical Midwestern diet. I think we had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on Wonder Bread probably every day of my life. We had Jell-O with almost every day. Coming from the beef state, which is Nebraska, Omaha in those days was the largest stockyards in America. So beef and pork were rather important. So there you go.
Okay, so like a typical American diet
Yep.
in more or less which decade?
This was in the 50s and 60s, so long ago. But the interesting thing is most of us know, if you watch, I ask actually any of my patients to go watch a movie from the 40s or 50s and even the 60s. And everybody is what we would now call skinny. And yes, there was, there might have been 1 or 2 obese people, but it was such a rarity. And we were eating what we would now think was junk, but everybody was skinny,
Mm.
and it's shocking.
Yes, yes, I've seen pictures, you know, just comparing even in the 70s
Yeah,
with a whole bunch of people on the beach compared to today. And that's what we can see from, you know, to do with weight, from how people look. But there's been a whole bunch of other changes as well. And what we're going to talk about today is close to my heart because it's not just about food and weight and sugar, but it's also about gut health. Is that right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And this comes from your new book. Can you just tell us a little bit about your new book and why you wrote it?
Yeah, the plant paradox series. I think this is the eighth in the series. Each book, I try to make the current book based on things that I discovered either in writing the previous book or with my patients. And one of the things that struck me through the years, again, I am a heart surgeon by training, and actually, I did my pediatric heart surgery fellowship at Great Ormond Street in London, England. So your accent is very, very pleasant and familiar to me.
Oh, thank you.
So the what we found through the years, 30 years ago, I started trying to keep people away from me as a heart surgeon. And one of the things that I write about in the book is that a lot of my female patients who came to me for various issues, whether it's weight, whether it's autoimmune diseases, diabetes, about half of them just almost coincidentally would mention they're taking one or two antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs and just kind of threw it off as, oh, it's normal. I'm a middle-aged female, and that's normal. And what was very interesting as we went along with my program, they would kind of sheepishly mention, oh, 6 months in, um, I'm off of my antidepressants. Is that I don't need them anymore? Is that okay? And they'd go, and it's amazing how much better my brain works now that I'm off of these things. So, intrigued me we're working on their diabetes or their autoimmune disease, and here's this side effect that they're no longer needing antidepressants. And so that actually made me say, well, why would that be? And it turns out that as in the new book, The Gut Brain Paradox, we now know that there are bacteria in our microbiome that can control the production of feel-good hormones like serotonin, like GABA, can control the excitatory hormone like dopamine. And those bacteria, depending on the amount or whether they're there at all, make a huge difference in what chemicals, hormones our brain actually sees. And one of the scary things that I've written about before, but I really emphasize this time around is as you and I know in North America, Roundup is glyphosate is sprayed on everything. It's in all of our crops, whether they're GMO or not. And they're sprayed in our schoolyards. They're in most California wines. And what people don't know is that Monsanto actually patented Roundup glyphosate as an antibiotic, not as a weed killer. And we now know that the effects of glyphosate is it specifically kills off the tryptophan pathway of bacteria. And the tryptophan pathway is serotonin and all the feel-good hormones. So all of a sudden, you start connecting the dots and kind of getting back to where you're going. People are eating wheat that, believe it or not, don't get me wrong, wheat's kind of evil. But when I was eating Wonder Bread back in the 50s, which was probably the most awful thing I could have been eating. There wasn't any glyphosate in it. And, nobody was depressed and nobody was fat. We were talking off camera. So this discovery that getting rid of some of these glyphosate-containing compounds was a big factor. The other thing that was interesting that I've talked about, there's a gut-centric theory of appetite. And that's becoming more and more evident now that these GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic, like Wegovy, are popular. We used to think that the nerves in our gut were producing these satiety hormones like GLP-1. And there's others like CCK. It turns out we're wrong about that. It's actually bacteria that are producing these hormones. And we're not only missing those bacteria, but some companies have actually come out with bacteria that do produce GLP-1 agonists. So the pieces are beginning to fit into the puzzle. So this gut-centric theory is, okay, why are you eating food in the first place? Well, obviously we have to have food. You can't live on air. Some yogi instructors think you can, but so who are you eating the food for? And are you eating for us or are you eating for the gut microbiome? And that sounds kind of odd, but there was a really cool study in China a few years ago where they took a bunch of volunteers and they put them on a 2-week water fast. All they got was water. One group, that's all they got was water. The other group got 100 calories a day of soluble fiber. Now, we can't digest soluble fiber, but good bacteria, what I call gut buddies, love the stuff. That's what they eat. That's what they need. So they looked at hunger in these people. And the folks who got the soluble fiber, 2 weeks of a water fast with 100 calories of soluble fiber, had absolutely no hunger. The other group, they were hungry. And so what happened? Well, I submit, and we see it in my patients all the time, you give the good guys what they want to eat, and they go, hey, we're good down here. You don't have to go looking for anything else. We got all we need. Thank you very much. You don't have to go look for anything else.
That's amazing.
And yeah, I mean, it's really amazing. And certainly one of the arguments that can be made is even with our bad diets, quote unquote, in the 50s and 60s and even 70s, we still had a lot of the food that we were eating that was actually feeding the good guys what they wanted. And these are the starch, the resistant starches, the fibers that all of us now know have been completely removed from our food. So we may have exactly the same calorie counts, and yet the food, who we're feeding, has changed completely.
I want to take a quick break to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews. And when you rate and review this podcast, not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it so that we can help more people feel better, and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar. Yeah, that's such a huge mindset shift to go from I'm feeding myself to I'm feeding my bacteria, let alone seeing bacteria as something positive, which is yet another big mindset shift. Because, especially since COVID, even though it's a virus, we still kind of tend to think that all these little critters, are negative. And I remember telling people often, since I stopped eating sugar 10 years ago, no, I'm trying to get more bacteria into my diet, the friendly bacteria. But that feels like an oxymoron for most people.
Yeah, and I spend the first chapter of the gut-brain paradox telling how all this fear of bacteria came about. And there was back a couple of hundred years ago a rather big war between two chemists in France, one of whom happened to be Louis Pasteur, and one of whom had to be by the name of Antoine Beauchamp. And they were arch rivals, and they both probably correctly figured out what fermentation was, how fermentation happened. And Pasteur was, I understand, a really good public speaker, and the other guy wasn't. And Pasteur became a favorite of the King of France because he discovered that it was actually bacterial contamination that was causing wine to go bad. Needless to say, that would be a pretty good thing to find out, particularly if you're in France. So he really rose up the ranks and he, of course, said that bacteria are bad; they're evil. Beauchamp, on the other hand, said, no, 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 no. This is a ecological system. This is the terrain or terroir that these guys exist in. And yeah, if the bacteria and the molds and the yeast are all in the right proportion, that's a perfect ecological system. So it's when one gets out of balance that the problem. So what we should be trying to do is maintain this balance. And so his theory of the terrain fell into disrepute. Now, what's fun, and it's in multiple books about these two gentlemen. Uh, it looks like on his deathbed, Pasteur called Beauchamp to his bed, and he basically said, "You're right. It's the terrain," and it is. So the problem is this germ theory that germs were evil really ushered in most of what we do, and particularly when antibiotics were discovered in the 40s. That kind of confirmed the germ theory that, oh my gosh, we can kill off these bad guys and cure disease. And I try to make the point, sorry guys, Beauchamp was right. It's the balance that we should be achieving. And once you achieve that balance, all sorts of good things happen.
Oh, yeah.
And Hippocrates knew this. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, 2,500 years ago,
Yeah.
said all disease begins in the gut.
All
And
disease begins in the gut. So how come he got it over how many years ago?
2,500 years ago.
And we're still, quote unquote, discovering that today with all of our technology and all of our prior knowledge. We're still not quite at the conclusion that Hippocrates came to 2,500 years ago. It's a bit discouraging.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's been other attempts at this, but it's so ingrained in us that bacteria are evil, and our job is to kill them off. I just was on a plane yesterday, and I, of course, walk onto the door of the plane, and they hand you a hand sanitizer pad, and I go, "No, thank you."
Mhm.
And it's like it's still absolutely ingrained in us. In
Yeah.
fact, sadly, Dr. Mark Hyman is a friend of mine, and he has a daughter who's a third year medical student at a very prestigious university, which I won't mention. And he was telling me recently that she's now in her third year of medical school, and they have yet to have a course on the microbiome.
Really?
Really, in 2025, and you just shake your head.
It's funny because we're kind of obliged, but certainly I am obliged to have all these disclaimers all over the place on my website and in my emails about, consult a doctor. I mean, I can't give medical advice, wouldn't want to anyway. And I'm an English teacher, not a doctor. And yet, you can consult a doctor if you like, but that doesn't mean they know anything about gut health. And, not because they don't want to, but because that's just not taught.
No, it's just not. Even now. In
Mm.
fact, one of my patients, a fairly new patient, had a bunch of gut issues, and he went and saw quite a well-established gastroenterologist, a GI doctor, and he asked him, kind of point blank, well, what do you suppose this is about, the microbes, that live in my gut? He says, oh no, they have nothing to do with this. And it's like, wow, really? So we've got a long way to go.
It's almost as if, someone would ask me as an English teacher, what about the grammar? And I'd be like, oh no, grammar has nothing to do with language. So, this whole podcast is about life after sugar. And so the message is, from me at least, any reduction in sugar is a step in the right direction. You don't have to cut it out completely, but the more you cut it, probably the better your health will be. And I would add, the better your gut health would be, because as far as I know from all the stuff I've read and I teach, sugar is like number one on the worst thing you can eat for gut health. Would you agree?
Yeah, part of the problem with sugar. So bacteria compete for carbon atoms. That's what they want to eat. And in the good old days, we have to remember that sugar is a rather recent commodity. In the good old days, most of the bacteria who are good for us, like sugar molecules that are all joined together in long chains, which are starches. And starches, because they're sugar molecules that are all chained together, it takes a great deal of work by our digestive enzymes to break those starches apart so that you can get to these molecules. And in the good old days, it there would be a lot left over after digestion occurred, where there would still be a lot of these starches joined up. And most of our bacteria live in our colon, in our large intestine. And those guys would then go, oh, this is what we want. We will ferment these guys to break these starches down. And that's what we want to eat. And that's what it's been for millions of years, right? Now, fast forward, and what we've done, unfortunately, is we've been able to break these sugar molecules apart. In fact, one of the scariest things is white flour. The glycemic index of white flour is even higher than table sugar. And so we've been able to break all these bonds. And now there are these kind of instant available sugar molecules. Now, two bad things about that. All those instantly available sugar molecules are absorbed very rapidly high up in our intestines, number one. Number two, there's nothing left coming down the pipe down to the bacteria who really want them because they're all gone. And number three, we see that bacteria are pretty smart and they go, hey, you know what? There's a lot of good, easy pickings way up in the intestines. And let's go up there and take advantage of it. And so we see a ton of people who are suffering from SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And why are those guys there? Well, I'll give you an example here in Santa Barbara. We have whale watching in Santa Barbara, and for most of my life, there was only one sort of whale that was here, and it was a gray whale. And now we actually have humpback whales, like from Hawaii, and we have one of the biggest pods of blue whales. And and they've never been here up until the last few years. And you go, well, what are these guys doing here? With climate change, their food supply is now here in Santa Barbara, and it never was.
Hmm.
So, and it's just a great example. Okay, the food supply chain, these guys went to where the food was, and now these bacteria is easy picking food that they never had before. And so we see them taking advantage. To get to the point of the book in the gut brain paradox, we now know that these sugar seeking bacteria, which quite frankly are bad, they literally send text messages to our brain that says, you need to seek out sugar. And because we're not going to tell you why, but you need to seek out sugar. And so, sugar addicts, we are addicted to sugar, I propose, because our bacteria, the bad guys, have hijacked this message to get them what they want.
Yeah, yeah, that is a great explanation of how, and we feel when we're a sugar addict, that I would argue most of us are, whether or not we
Yes.
actually recognize it. We feel like our brain has been hijacked. It's like we fall into this other dimension and start eating all these sugary foods mindlessly. And the whole notion of mindfulness goes right out the window. And it's like we're not even responsible for our actions anymore. And if I understand what you're saying, it's like it's not your fault, sugar addict. It's the fault of your bacteria.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Uh,
And yes, we're feeding that bacteria, but it's also the processed foods industry, I would say, that is making this type of food. I call it, I don't even grace it with the word food, but these products are so super available and cheap for us to continue feeding the bad bacteria.
yeah, it's there's been books written about the profitability of processing and ultra processing food. You would think that the more you process a food, make it easier to obtain, easier to eat, that would hurt your profits. But there's actually beautiful economic research that shows the more you process it, the more money you make, and of course, that's the name of the game. Corporations have to keep their stockholders happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like it's easier said than done to say, well, just stop eating processed foods, stop eating processed flour, refined sugar. But it's not that easy to actually do. It, let alone to recognize that this is what the problem is and that gut health is like the grammar of language. In other words, you can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's so great to talk to Dr. Gundry about gut health because, no pun intended, but gut health is close to my heart, which is why this is only the first half of our conversation together, and I'll publish the second part in next week's episode. And Dr. Gundry has written several books, of which his most recent one called The Gut Brain Paradox, And another one that you may have heard of is the plant paradox. And I think it's fascinating for us to listen to an expert talk about the subject because between you and me, I don't think you need to be a doctor to understand the importance of gut health. So I hope that this first part of my conversation with Dr. Gundry has started you thinking more deeply about what you can do for your gut health. And spoiler alert, sugar is one of the worst things for gut health. So reducing or cutting sugar is a fantastic first step. But cutting down or cutting out sugar is much easier said than done. And in my experience, the most difficult step is the first step. And that's why I'm inviting you to take the cravings quiz. It's a 10-question quiz that I created especially to get you thinking a little deeper about your cravings. And whereas most quizzes give you generic feedback about your score, I'm offering you more specific feedback and practical tips to help you put theory into practice and take that first step to get rid of your cravings. So go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the big green button, Do the Cravings Quiz. That's aftersugarclub.com and click on the big green button to start getting rid of cravings today. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.